The greatest need in the 21st century is for visionary leadership. Leadership is the cause and solution to all human problems. Now, 2020 has been an extremely politically charged year in America. Therefore, I thought it would be beneficial to address some of the primary political pitfalls that are obvious in today's global landscape. So I asked Dr. LisaAnnes Chung, the founder of Kenley College, to address the 5 top prevalent shortcomings that she is currently detecting in political leadership. Now, regardless if you are in politics or not, these 5 key principles are necessary to implement in your personal life, for we all must take personal leadership in our own lives. As Dr. Myles Munroe said it best, we need less politicians in politics and more leaders. So join Dr. LisaAnnes Chung and I as we discuss the 5 pitfalls of political leadership. Greetings, Lisa, from the UK, but my Bahamian sister. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Tristan. It's wonderful to be here.
So you are the founder, along with your husband, Lance, of Kenley College, which provides leadership training and strategy for young politicians. What a season to be in, to actually be able to express your gifting, because I know the demand is probably getting more and more as people are seeing, listen, a business person can become a politician. A veteran can be a politician. So I'm sure you're getting a lot more demand for your courses. And I thought this would be a great time to have a conversation because we are living in such a divisive and politically charged atmosphere this year. And I thought it would be benefit to address what you foresaw as the top 5 shortcomings that you can pinpoint in political leadership that you see happening on a global scale.
Okay. Well, definitely the first one I'll start with is a misunderstanding of identity. Anybody who's gone through the self-discovery process would understand how powerful identity is to everything. But why is it so important to politicians? Because sometimes we put politics in a box that says it's too dirty, we don't want to go there. But the reality is politicians are just leaders in a specific sphere. So if you're looking at the first one I'd address is the misunderstanding of identity. They don't understand, not everybody, but there are a lot of them who are struggling with an understanding of who they are as an individual, who they are, their own leadership identity. And once you touch people who are struggling with insecurity issues and they are going into the public domain, then all of those insecurity issues start to whoosh. It just comes up so in your face, you can't miss it. Now, these are people who might have been fine dealing with those insecurity issues and nobody noticed before, but now, especially if you're in frontline politics, it's right there. You can't miss it. So they're struggling with identity of themselves, and then they may be struggling with the identity of other people, because if you do not understand that we are all created with leadership ability, now we choose whether we step into that ability or not, but we're created with it. And then you can look at somebody and think you're either better off or you are worse than them or you're lesser than them. Then how do you lead somebody with that understanding, with that misunderstanding of who you are and who they are? So you're dealing with that going on. And then you also have this whole thing of identity of a nation or a city or a state, wherever you may be leading. And why is that important? Because even in our own makeup, we all have things that are unique to us that makes us distinct. Even though we have the commonality of being leaders, there are different things that make us distinct. And you can look at who you are and what you're supposed to be doing tied into how you were designed. And so I look at even the identity of nations and cities as tied into the design of those things. They weren't designed by chance. They're designed that way because of what they were supposed to be doing in terms of the benefit to the earth. The problem, therefore, comes if you've now got leaders who then themselves don't know who they are, taking their misunderstanding of who they are and imposing that on a nation or a city or a state. And that nation, city, state, whatever it is, whatever level it is, also struggling. They're seeing the repercussions or the impact, but that's a negative impact of the leader's lack of identity or misunderstanding of identity. So
You know, Lisa,
yeah, go ahead.
That reminds me of one of the most important statements that Jesus said. He said, I am the bread of life. I am the Son of God. I am the Son of Man. He knew exactly who he was. He knew why he was here. So he was not confused. He was very secure in himself. And I think sometimes there's a fine line between confidence and pride or ego. And I recall one of the scriptures even stated that Jesus was humble. And that word humble in Greek means earthy, meaning he was down to earth. When you have that confidence in who you are, you know why you're here, you know where you're going, you can be down to earth with people because you're not trying to prove yourself.
Exactly.
You get to the point where, you know, I have nothing to prove to myself, to my husband, to anybody else. I'm just me. And I think that is a very valid principle that needs to be addressed. And I'm sure you're addressing it at Kenley College because it's key and it's foundational, not only to our lives, but to the cities that we govern or that are governed by these politicians and the nations, like you were saying. What would you say is probably the second pitfall in political leadership that you're seeing?
I'd say it's power without principles. So if you look at principles as foundational laws, you can see two types of principles in operation, two ways that you can look at principles. So you have the foundational laws that would govern how you lead. It's governing your decision-making, how you view life and all of those things. But it's also how something should be operating, how something is functioning, how it should function or how it was designed to function. So there are leaders who come into the political sphere and they do not care about principles. They figure it's about the winning, but it really is about the leading. And so when people don't have principles, you see issues with character. And I'm sure that some of the people who are following what you do with Agents of Change are aware of some of those key tests that we face in character, and politicians will be no exception. They'll face tests of appetites, the sex, the drugs, the drink, food, those kinds of things. They also face things such as the greed for power. What are they willing to do? And you're seeing that even now. What are politicians prepared to do to get power, or what are they prepared to do to maintain that power? What are they going to do to hold on to it? And then the other one is they're going to have the fame and the popularity. Right now, it is big to be in the news. And you have sometimes they will change their principles, which means that they never had them in the first place, but they're willing to compromise their principles for the sake of a few minutes of a soundbite so that they can be aired. And you would have seen that sometimes people had a particular view and they were strong on that view, but then they realized that most of the mainstream media wasn't going there. And they've just literally changed their course to get that sound bite. And so that then was a compromise for the sake of fame or popularity. And the other one is related to money. And we want to separate out the money as one of the tests because you're going to be managing people's resources. What do you do when you may have never faced so much money? You might have not faced millions of dollars or pounds or whatever currency you have, and sometimes billions, and you're faced with this. Well, can a few million be missing? I was on a committee where we actually oversaw the a new or a government ministry was asking for a new pot of funds for a project that they had already gotten. Why did they have to ask for the funds for the project that they had already gotten funding for? Because let's just say a few million US dollars went missing. Nobody knows where it went missing. So character issues come up a whole lot because you've got power without principles. And then you look at some of these leaders and you realize that they have therefore lost the public trust because they're more focused on how do they pull the other candidate down or this other person down or the other party down, and less about leading. It's less about leading, and that is where the struggle is. And we have to recognize how important it is to serve people. And so if you go into politics or you go into power, you get into a position of power and you have forgotten that you are there to serve, not to be served, you're going to have a failure in the area of principles. So one of the ways that you could have protected yourself from this is putting in some kinds of systems with personal accountability. Now, when you're in government, there are hopefully accountability systems that your country, your state, whatever, has put in place. But if you were stepping into power without principles, you could find your way around it. You didn't need, if you want to be corrupt, you'll find your way around corruption. But if you put in place your own personal accountability system, so that means maybe you have a mentor or you have a group of people that you have chosen to be accountable to, then that will help to safeguard you from having some of the pitfalls related to principles that you didn't have to have.
You know, Lisa, I have to share a story that I've never shared before. I was traveling with Dr. Myles, and we were meeting with a prime minister of one of the Caribbean islands on one of my trips. And each time he landed in a country, he always requested to meet with a prime minister, the parliament head, whatever it was. And so we were in with the prime minister, and I remember I felt like a little insignificant mouse, like in the corner, and I just want to sit in the corner and observe, because it's, you're not supposed to take a sip of water until they take a sip of water. So there's all this protocol. And I have to tell you, in America, we don't have a lot of protocol. And so I was very nervous, and I sat there. I didn't move a muscle. And Dr. Myles Munroe was engaging with the prime minister, and then I didn't know he was going to do this. And Dr. Myles says to the prime minister, "Do you mind if I engage with one of my delegates," meaning us, and they could ask you a question? He goes, "Sure, that's great." So he looked at me, Trista, "Do you have a question for the prime minister?" And I was like, yes, of course I do. And the only thing I could come up with was a question regarding character, because I knew how paramount it is, especially in politics. And I said to him, "Sir, do you find it very challenging to operate with character in the position that you are in?" And his statement was basically, "No, I don't, and it's not an issue."
Wow.
And so then later in the car, because I always have, just like the disciples would ask questions afterwards with Jesus, "Papa Myles, what did you think? Is that the right?" He says, "Trista, of course he's going to say he operates with character." I go, "Oh, you're right." So in essence, it's not what they say, but we watch their actions.
There you go.
What are they doing? And I got to tell you, there's a lot of stuff coming up. And like there's that saying, whatever's done in the darkness will be brought out into the light. The Bible is very clear. It's just a matter of time.
There you go.
That's all it is. So everything we do needs to be done with the highest standards of integrity, because it will come out, especially in politics. You have whole teams of people looking for dirt, scouring for it. They vet you before you even say you're going to go into office because of that.
Yes.
So it's easy to say, "Oh yes, I operate in character and principles, and I have high moral standards," but don't listen to what they say. Like Jesus said, don't listen to the Pharisees, don't do what they do, don't say. We have to look at the actions. So excellent point. What would you say would be the third pitfall of what we see going on in politics right now with the leadership?
Failure of management.
Mm,
When you
big.
are in massive, when you are getting involved in politics, you are managing so many things, not only your time and your schedule, but I alluded to the money that went missing. There's a managing of the resources, whether that's finance or other resources. Maybe it's, you may be in a country where there are mines that need to be managed from a government perspective, even though that might be in a lot of cases where some of these things happen. They are given to private investors who own it essentially. But you are managing resources. But you know why it's important to recognize about the management principle for a politician is because you don't own the money. You don't own the resources. You are managing it on behalf of the people. They have entrusted you with that management responsibility to steward their resources, because they want to know that you should be going in there. And you, when people elect you, they're looking at, hoping that the person that they have elected, if you are going for frontline politics and elected office, they're hoping that the person that they have elected is actually going to do what's good for them, is going to do what's good for their constituency, is going to do what's good for their nation. So they're looking for somebody who essentially is going to be managing well. And it's important that you do that and you understand, hold on, this isn't my money. I think I heard somebody say something about something to the effect that governments are the worst because they're not dealing with their own money, they're dealing with other people's money. But it means that they don't understand the weightiness and the responsibility that comes with management. And why we have to look at management, because people are so focused on leadership that they make it as if leadership has a higher standard than management. It's both of them. They're two sides of the same coin. You've got to do both. And you are not exempt from management because you're going into politics. It's just as important.
Lisa, that's a key valid point, because even for us as Kingdom citizens, we have to manage the resources because we don't own them. The King does. I have to tell you, my son has been hounding me. Mom, you are the most resourceful person I've ever seen. And I'm like, that's a compliment. He goes, Mom, it's too much. And I said, God will give me more because I can manage. And that's a key element that needs to be established before people enter into politics. Mm-hmm. And Lisa, we see greed happening on a massive scale because they're using their platform for selfish gain while the people are perishing.
Yes.
That's in essence greed. And we see this. And listen, again, it will come out in the wash. It all comes out. Mm-hmm. Yes. Now, what would you say is the fourth pitfall?
Well, you just said the people are perishing. And one of the reasons that people perish, or one of the primary reasons that people are perishing where you have politicians who have fallen into the pit, is because there's a lack of vision. Where there is no vision, people perish. Cities perish, nations perish, even a little constituency will perish because the person who is has political power, has no vision. And what I find is so strange is that they will come up with great programs. They have programs. They are not short of programs. What program are we going to do? And those programs are tied to their term limits. Vision is always looking further than what you can accomplish, because you always want to be able to pass on vision to the next generation. And that might be literally the next generation, or who is going to continue after you. But what you find is that they have not thought beyond their term limits. So they come up with programs upon programs, and they plan, but they only plan for programs. So if they're serving for 4 years or a 5-year term, that's what they plan for. They give you another set of programs that they're going to institute if they want to be re-elected. But it's always programs. I think about one of the most popular programs. I know you have it in the US. It's called the Back to School program. And what it is that a lot of times we forget that we'll always have poor people with us. We'll always have poor in regardless of which country, you're going to always have a relatively poorer community existing there. And so you have these back to school programs, which on the surface are fine. You're helping people who may not be able to have the supplies that they need, the back to school supplies they need for their children to go to school. But what this is essentially is a quick win for a politician, because you can get the photo op and you can show what a wonderful job you're doing. You could have probably partnered with businesses in the community, so it never took away from the budget that you were allocated as the politician. And then you put on the back to school program and you get all the glory. The problem, however, that I think that a lot of times we don't see on the back end of that is next year you're doing another back to school program. Possibly there's an increase in the number of people who are back to school. What does that tell me? You didn't really have a vision that would have brought in more jobs. You didn't have a vision that would have allowed people within that community to start to create businesses or to encourage businesses to come in, because you were too focused on set programs as opposed to a clear vision. And why is vision important? Vision is also not about the feeling. Feeling may accompany a good vision, but it is not the end, the be all and end all of vision. It's not just about a slogan that has a good feel to it. It is, what is the action? Because if your vision is action oriented, that you plan out and you initiate, then you can actually have other people come alongside you to help you accomplish it. So not feeling, but vision. And it's also about being other-centered. And this is where sometimes politicians will struggle, because they're more focused on selfish political ambition and less about others. How do they serve others? So vision is always other-centered, because we're looking at how we serve, how we make who we serve be placed in a better position because we were here.
You know, Lisa, that is one of the key ones. Again, when I traveled with Dr. Myles, I did a 2-week trip with him once. And I think we visited 5 different nations and 4 different political leaders that we met with. And sometimes in the nations, 2 or 3 political leaders. That was the number one question when we would sit with them. He would ask them, what is your vision for your nation? Mm-hmm. It always came up. He wouldn't start out a conversation that way. It was always personal. And then he would go into the vision, because he explained that to me, that roads, building better roads, that's a goal. That's a short-term goal. Mm-hmm. Rebuilding the infrastructure. He says it's about vision. And one of the things he warned each of the Caribbean nations that we went to on that trip was, watch out for the foreign investors. They will come in and they will own you. And he used his nation, the Bahamas, as an example with Atlantis. They have the largest employment institution there in the hospitality. It was like 4,000 or 6,000 employees that they retain. And what happens when Cuba opens up and tourism goes down? What happens when there's a lockdown like this and the hotel industry suffers? The whole nation of Bahamas suffers. And he says, listen, let's go into agriculture, sugar, let's do some things. And so he warned each of these nations with much foresight, because of his experience with the Bahamas, foreseeing the suffering that could happen at any moment. And we're seeing that in our lifetime. And so that was one of the key elements he always discussed with politicians. So excellent, excellent advice. What would you say is the 5th shortcoming?
The failure to self-check, that reflection that's necessary. So sometimes I look at politicians and I think, especially those who want to run again, did you really, really assess what you did before? Because if you assessed it before, would you inflict that same kind of leadership on the people again? And I realize that sometimes politics is busy work. If you are really, really invested in making a difference, it's very busy. It's very demanding. And unlike somebody who might be leading a company or even leading a community group, when you're in politics, there is more pulling, there's more demand on you, and people believe that they own you. So you don't have that time, but you have to literally create the time. And one of the biggest pitfalls is that politicians often don't stop. I was talking to one recently. He said he goes to London from Sunday night and comes back. If it's good, he can get back in on Thursday night, but generally doesn't get back until Friday. And Saturday and Sunday is his time in the constituency office. So I said, what about your family? He said, well, they got to understand. Yes and no. Because even if the person was not married, there were no children, there's a time that you need to pull away. There is a rule, a law, a principle even of rest. And part of that rest is to be able to reflect. What did you learn? You're always going to be in a position of learning. What went right? What went wrong? What can we do better? What did we miss the first time? And even in terms of, we talked about the power without principles before. Where did I compromise? And if I compromised, how can I safeguard myself and the service that I want to give from this happening again? And that can only be done when you just stop and you self-check and you reflect.
Yeah, that's key. A lot of times people in administration put a lot of yes men around them. Mm-hmm. And we need people that are in leadership where iron sharpens iron, and you become better, you become sharper, you become more diligent and aware of perhaps some things that could have been done better, or another area we need to focus on, or a different strategy for the vision. And I agree, we must always continue, even in our personal lives, making self-corrections and improving. A lot of times our spouses can help us with that, can't they?
Yeah, they can.
We got built-in peanut galleries. Just, okay, how can I become better? What can I do differently? Or what do you see is going on here? So I believe that's key. You know, Lisa, you have brought up so many key valid points that are necessary. And I do believe we need to have more people engaging in these conversations, because it's imperative. Us as the light, the salt, the yeast, we have answers and solutions, and we just need to utilize the voice, utilize technology. You have done excellent with Kenley College. And I mean, I would have never dreamed, 10, 20 years ago that something like this is so paramount. So Lisa, for such a time as this, you were put here on the earth, and your background and your ancestors and your family and government, and you growing up and seeing things and then applying kingdom principles. You are absolutely right now where you need to be and operating in your gifting. So I'm excited for the work that you're doing. It is necessary. It is needed here on the planet, for sure. So I will end with this. The most famous saying I can remember Dr. Myles Munroe saying time and time again, especially at his leadership conferences. He would say, we need less politicians in politics and more leaders. Sila. Thank you, Lisa, for joining us today. All the best. Godspeed in advancing the work that you're doing. May he give you wisdom as you go forward and excel in the work that he has given you to do.
Thank you, Trista, for having me. I appreciate it.
God bless.